Dear viewers, welcome to this latest episode of Manitowoc History Review. My guess is you're asking yourself, did Manitowoc really have a hobo jungle? The answer is emphatically yes. There was a hobo tramp jungle in Manitowoc for just over 50 years. The question is, what brought them to Manitowoc? The answer is the railroads. Before 1873, Manitowoc did not have a tramp problem, but that year the Milwaukee, Lakeshore, and Western Railroad, later known as the Chicago and Northwestern Railroad, connected Manitowoc to Milwaukee, and the flow of tramps began. Then in 1895, the Wisconsin Central Railroad, later known as the Soo Line Railroad, connected Manitowoc to Fond du Lac and other cities in the Fox Valley. By 1900, trains came and went from Manitowoc from the north, south, and west. With each train, Manitowoc experienced an influx of tramps. Today, we are going to be visiting Manitowoc's hobo jungle, or as close to it as we can get, as the area is now so overgrown since both the Wisconsin Central and Chicago and Northwestern railroads discontinued service on these lines. To get there, we are going to be taking the steps to nowhere. The steps are located on the southern edge of Evergreen Cemetery and lead down to the abandoned tracks of the Chicago and Northwestern Railroad. I did highlight the steps on my third video on the history of Evergreen Cemetery, but as we descend the steps, I will give a recap of the steps' history. Please forgive the bouncing of the camera, but it's almost impossible to climb up or down the steps and hold the camera steady. The same is true as I walk the tracks, as the railroad ties have become very deteriorated and difficult to walk on. In recent times, the purpose of these 42 hand-laid stones steps was a mystery. That was until I came across an article describing the steps and the reason the city paid to have them installed. The steps, which are difficult to locate unless you have a general knowledge of their location, are found at the southwest corner of the cemetery, almost to the rear. They were laid in late 1938 and into the spring of 1939 by employees of the cemetery under the direction of Cemetery Superintendent Edward Passworth. The purpose was quite simple: safety. Safety of persons taking a shortcut around the back lower west side of the cemetery. For years, walkers that wanted to enter or exit the cemetery on the back southwest side had been forced to climb up or down a steep bank that rose from the Chicago Northwestern tracks. Their trip up and down the extremely steep slope was dangerous and probably resulted in injuries over time. The city finally heard their complaints in 1938 and started the process of installing steps. When completed, the crew removed a number of old trees and fallen limbs and then planted grass on both sides of the new steps. Strangely, using the steps required walking the railroad tracks from or to Revere Drive, sometimes at night. This was probably more dangerous than climbing the hill before the steps were installed. It was reported over time that part of the steps were made from old discarded gravestones. I cannot confirm or deny this was the case, but I did examine each of the 42 steps. I did not observe anything that might have been a gravestone, but some of the steps are 3 layers thick, and it's possible some gravestones might have been used as fill under the top steps. Today, trees and brush have taken over the once neatly planted grass that once covered the hill. But the steps can still be used if one does not mind climbing through the dense brush at the bottom. We are now walking the abandoned tracks of the Chicago and Northwestern Railroad. As stated earlier, the tracks have not been used for between 20 and 25 years and have become impassable in some areas. Our goal is to reach the Chicago and Northwestern Railroad trestle. As we travel along the tracks, look for the deer as they cross the tracks in front of me. The deer live in this area and can be seen almost daily browsing in the cemetery. Also, off to my right is a large gravel area. At one time, this was one of two city boat launch ramps. This too is now abandoned and the area fenced off. As with most cities that accumulate a population of hobos and tramps, it doesn't take long for them to find an out of the way location to set up a camp, or as we know it, a hobo jungle. The jungle was usually at a location alongside railroad tracks where they got off or on a passing train with ease. For Manitowoc, this location was just below the south side of Evergreen Cemetery and about 300 yards west of the current Revere Drive viaduct. The ideal location for the hobo jungle was where the Sioux Line and Chicago and Northwestern railroads intersected. At this location, there is a metal trestle or bridge where the Sioux Line train passes under that trestle. All trains had to slow down at this point, which gave the hobos and tramps time to board or jump off the moving train. The hobo jungle would have been in a flat area near this location so that they did not have to go too far to board or exit a passing train. Jumping on or off a moving train is not as easy as one might expect. Nationally, between 1901 and 1906, it was estimated that as many as 18,000 men died and another 17,000 were seriously injured from falling under the wheels of a moving train. The jungle itself was a sight to behold. There would have been a conglomeration of shacks, shanties, and huts of every conceivable configuration. They were made mostly of scrap wood gleaned from the inside of wooden freight cars. These dwellings became the property of the tramp community, passing continuously from tramp to tramp. All were welcome in the jungle, but they actually had an organization which had a set of rules and ethnic code, which each individual was expected to obey. If it was found that someone had broken these rules and put the jungle camp in danger, that individual was escorted from the camp and told never to return. Of course, the number of tramps and hobos varied with the passing seasons. The number usually began to increase in the spring and summer, and then tapered off in fall, with the fewest to be found in the city over the winter months. Who wants to spend the winter in a cold tar paper shack when you can be in Florida or some other southern state over the cold winter months? The number of tramps and hobos in the city at any one time varied. It could range from as low as 10 to as many as 25 or 30. The number constantly changed. As the number of tramps and hobos increased, the problem for the city police department also increased. For many years, the police department had one officer known as the tramp officer. Officer William Carley was assigned this duty. Each morning, he made the long walk to the hobo jungle, which was also known as the Hobo's Roost, or the Blacks, which was the name of the railroad bridge which crossed the Manitowoc River at that point and has always been painted black. Once at the jungle, he gathered up the tramps and escorted them to the city limits, advising them that it would be to their advantage to keep moving on. Officer Carley was a large man and was known to the tramps as someone you did not mess around with. His job was not an easy one. for most tramps and hobos carried some type of knife, a straight razor, and sometimes even a pistol. On many occasions, Officer Carley was known to invite danger, and tales of his victorious battles against seemingly great odds were legendary. As you can see, this is as far as I can go. From this point on, the tracks are impassable, and I will have to take another route to the railroad trestle and where I believe the hobo jungle was located. So bear with me as I return to the steps to nowhere and to the cemetery. Part of the problem for the police department was that not all the tramps arriving in Manitowoc stayed at the jungle. They would come into the city and find some little nook or cranny in which to camp out. The police department answer to this was Article 45 of the Manitowoc City Code, which read, to authorize the arrest, fine, or imprisonment of all persons not having visible means of support and are without employment, idle loitering, or rambling about, or staying in groceries, drinking saloons, houses of ill fame, or houses of bad repute, gambling houses, railroad depots, or fire engine houses, or who shall be found trespassing in the night time upon private premises of others, or begging or placing themselves in the street or other thoroughfares or public places to beg or receive alms. In most cases, those taken by the police were not arrested. They were taken to an area in the police station called the Tramp Station, also called the Pest House. Once again, they were not under arrest. They were held till morning, given a breakfast, and then escorted out of town. Records show that in 1898, 442 individuals were housed at the Tramp Station. Each breakfast cost the city 35 cents. We will now be on our way to the railroad trestle where we can see it from above. Here we will also see where the Chicago and Northwestern tracks meet and cross over the Sioux Line tracks. A few feet beyond this is the trestle where the Sioux Line tracks go under and the Chicago Northwestern trains travel the trestle. It is this area, I believe, the hobos and tramps established their camp. In this photo, we can see both the Sioux Line and Chicago and Northwestern tracks as they come together and head for the trestle. In the next two photos, we can see the trestle. The Chicago and Northwestern trestle was here before the Wisconsin Central Railroad established their line in 1895. So the Wisconsin Central had to go under the Northwestern trestle to continue its route. The third photo is the trestle seen from the other side of the Manitowoc River. Once again, it was in a flat area near the trestle where the hobo jungle would have been located, and the hobos had easy access to the slow-moving trains. Now, those tramps actually arrested for different offenses would have been taken before the municipal court and sentenced to days in the county jail at city expense. This became more expensive as the city now had to pay for 3 meals each day. This problem was solved in the 1920s when those in jail were taken to do a day's work at the city rock pile. Now, this was not the type of rock pile when we picture men in southern states in chain gangs breaking rocks with large sludge hammers. The city rock pile was located at the city gravel pit and was not a rock pile, but a pile of bricks. When an old building was taken down, the city allowed used bricks to be brought to the gravel pits. There, these from the jail were assigned to remove old mortar from each brick. They then cleaned the bricks and stacked them. The city then sold the bricks to recoup the cost of housing inmates. For almost 40 years, the police department kept what was called the Tramp book. An individual coming into Manitowoc with the intent of staying overnight was required to come to the police station and sign into the Tramp book. Those signing in were usually salesmen and sailors in port while their ship was being loaded or unloaded. The individual had to sign his name, age, occupation, and where he would be staying. Now, as can be expected, no self respecting tramp or hobo would actually come to the police station and sign into their book, although the police department did keep a record of those kept overnight in the tramp station. Of course, petty crime continued to be a problem in Manitowoc. Things went missing from homes, yards, and places of business. Many of these crimes were actually committed by young boys who had established gangs on both the north and south sides of the city. But it was much easier to blame the tramps and hobos passing through the city. In the country, barn fires were a common occurrence. If the fire could not be explained, it would be blamed on a passing tramp or hobo who had entered the barn for a night's rest and started a fire to keep warm. When the fire got out of hand and started the barn on fire, the tramp or hobo disappeared into the nearest woods. Many of the tramps and hobos not staying at the jungle found an empty freight car at the Sioux Line or Northwestern rail yards to spend the night. Many times they started a fire on the floor of the car to keep warm. It did not take much for the floor of the car, which were tinder dry, to start on fire. The fire department was called time and again to the railroad yards to put out boxcar fires. Getting back to the jungle, and before I go too far, I must mention that as you probably have noticed, I frequently use the terms hobo and tramp interchangeably. Yet this is not the case, for there is a major difference between a tramp and a hobo. A hobo is defined as an individual traveling from place to place, often by train, and is willing to work if he can find employment. In fact, the word hobo is derived from the word hoboy, meaning to hoe in a garden as a worker, whereas a tramp travels from place to place and has no intention of working or looking for employment. His main source of living is from handouts or begging. In the Manitowoc jungle, as in other jungles in the country, if a person is going to stay there and expects to eat the evening community meal, he is required to provide something for the food pot. Over time, that meal acquired the name Mulligan Stew, although I'm sure they had different types of meals depending on what was provided. Each individual was expected to go out and either find some type of work to buy provisions for the meal. If he could find no work, he was expected to knock on doors and ask for a handout. As is today, many citizens in the community in those days were willing to help those in need with a small handout or a few cents in change. Hobos and tramps were very adept at their trade. They had a well known series of signs and symbols used to communicate with each other. When one of their number found a kind hearted homemaker that was willing to share a little of her substance, he would, when not seen, place the appropriate symbol on the lady's front and back fence. The symbols noted that she was good for a handout. Other symbols indicated when a resident was not friendly, or even a mean dog that did not like visitors in his yard. Some of the most kind hearted and charitable to those in need were the nuns at Holy Family Hospital. The nuns kept a very large garden to help them supply fresh vegetables for patients in the hospital, except for one occasion in May 1933 when they were overwhelmed with requests and forced to call the police for help. The police came with their paddy wagon, nicknamed the Black Martha. In their first trip, they apprehended 10 tramps. They then made a second trip and captured 5 more. After a night in the tramp station, they were escorted out of town. Another interesting case is that of Henry Stolz Sr., father of Henry Stolz Jr., a well-known and respected mayor of Manitowoc in the 1920s. Henry Stolz Sr. was a truck farmer. A truck farmer was an old term used to describe a person who grew vegetables, fruits, and flowers to be sold to food stores and individuals in the community. Henry, along with his youngest son, owned and farmed 6 acres of land just below the south side of Evergreen Cemetery. The Hobo jungle was located only about 40 yards from his farm. Now, one would think that the hobos and tramps would take advantage of this and raid Henry's gardens and orchards at night for fresh vegetables and fruit, but that was not the case. It appears Henry took advantage of the situation and hired many of the tramps and hobos to work with him in his gardens for a small amount of money or payment in fresh vegetables. In any garden or orchard, there are always those fruits and vegetables that are not of the best quality and would not be accepted by local food stores. I'm sure this is what Henry used as part payment for their work. The tramps realized they had a good thing going and agreed to stay out of Henry's garden when not invited. As time went on, the hobo and tramp problem continued to increase to the point that the chief of police received so many complaints from citizens that he had to take action. The article appearing in the May 1914 Manitowoc Daily Herald told this story. Police break up nest of tramps at Hobo Roost. Police Chief Groffman and his men broke up a camp of hobos at Hobo Roost in the northern part of the city in the valley between the railroad tracks and the end of Michigan Avenue. It appears the police broke up the camp by destroying shanties, huts, and shacks and driving a large group of tramps and hobos out of town with a warning that if they returned, their punishment would not be light. Destroying the camp worked, but only for a while. Within weeks, the camp was back in operation. If things were bad in the 1920s, they only got worse in 1929 when the Great Depression hit the country. From 1929 until the beginning of World War II in 1941, unemployment in this country was around 25% and sometimes higher. This caused many of the young men and sometimes women to hit the road to look for work. Known as road warriors, they traveled the country, mostly by freight car, looking for any work they could find. Many of them ended up in hobo jungles out of desperation. As a result, some of those ended up in Manitowoc's jungle or passing through the city when no work could be found. World War II brought about a gradual decline to the ranks of the tramps and hobos. Many of them entered the military, and others took their jobs in factories and defense plants. Only the die-hard tramps and hobos continued to travel the country by rail, always wary of the police, who were continuously on the lookout for those trying to avoid military service. The jungle in Manitowoc finally came to an end sometime during this period, and by the end of 1945 was no more. Today, there are few reminders that for 50 years, large and small groups of men set up temporary quarters just below Evergreen Cemetery. So that brings an end to my story of Manitowoc's hobo jungle. But before doing so, I would like to relate one of my favorite tramp stories. Now, for those of you who are a bit squeamish, I suggest you end the video here. For those who would enjoy a little levity, please continue. As the story goes, 2 tramps were walking down a set of railroad tracks. Now the tramps had not eaten for several days, and both were quite hungry. As they walked along, they came across the carcass of a dead dog. The dog had been dead for several days and was quite bloated and swarmed with maggots. But that didn't stop one of the tramps, who went down on his knees and began to eat the now tender flesh of the dog. After a minute, the tramp looked up at his partner and asked if he wasn't going to join him, as there was plenty for both. The standing tramp answered by saying that while he was hungry, he was going to wait for a nice warm meal. The tramp on his knees finished his meal, and the two continued on their way. After about an hour, the tramp that had eaten the dog grabbed his stomach, dropped to his knees, and threw up everything he had eaten. His partner began to laugh and could not stop. The tramp on his knees looked at him and angrily asked why he was laughing. His partner looked at him and said, "I told you it wouldn't be long before I had a good warm meal." Well, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Thank you for joining me in my latest episode of Manitowoc History Review. I hope you enjoyed it. Once again, thank you for watching.